I can reliably predict at least one outcome of the midterm elections on Tuesday. With the exception of the winners of individual races, almost everyone will be unhappy. If current polling numbers hold, Democrats will be unhappy that they've lost control of the House. Republicans will be unhappy that they failed to regain control of the Senate. Tea Partiers will be unhappy that most of the bums they vowed to throw out of Washington remain in town. Liberal elites will be unhappy that many people cast votes that appear to betray their own self-interest. And President Obama, after having achieved the most ambitious set of legislative goals in decades, will be unhappy that he's viewed, even by some supporters, as more like a thin and exotic version of William Howard Taft than like the second coming of Abraham Lincoln. One notable exception to this veil of misery will be Fox News and the shadow political system the network has generated and sustained. With the emergence of Christine O'Donnell, the Tea Party candidate for Senate from Delaware, who seems never to have taken a civics course, the network has another potential superstar. When I think about the role Fox News plays in the political life of our nation, my mind conjures up explosives and poison gas. Not the role those weapons played in World War II, but the uses to which the capacity to produce them was turned after the war ended. If you have an entire industry geared up to produce explosives and poison gas, but demand collapses, what do? You find another way to use them. Michael Pollan, author of several books on the food industry, explains how this process unfolded. The great turning point in the industrialization of food, he says, can be dated with some precision to the day in 1947 when the huge munitions plant at Muscle Shoals, Alabama, switched over from making explosives to making chemical fertilizer. After World War II, the government found itself with a tremendous surplus of ammonium nitrate, the principal ingredient used to make explosives. It also happens to be an excellent source of nitrogen for plants. Serious thought was given to spraying America's forests with ammonium nitrate, but Pollan says the Department of Agriculture had a better idea. Spread it on farmland as fertilizer. The chemical fertilizer industry, along with the pesticide industry, which is based on poisoned gas developed for war, is the product of the government's effort to convert its war machine to peacetime purposes. The equivalent of World War II for the television news business was the 444-day Iran hostage crisis in 1979 and 1980, which began the transformation of news from half an hour a day on broadcast networks to 24/7 on cable news networks. Beginning with the founding of CNN in 1980 and increasing exponentially with the founding of Fox News in 1996, the cable news business confronted the problem of excess capacity, too much time to fill, and too little news to fill it. With the advent of chemical fertilizers and pesticides, the food industry confronted a similar problem. Too much food to consume and too few stomachs to consume it. The answer? Convince Americans to eat more, which we obligingly did with predictable results. 2/3 of us are now overweight. The cable news business responded to the challenge of excess capacity in a similar way. Convince Americans to watch more news. Much of the programming isn't real news, of course. Just as much of the food we eat isn't what Michael Pollan calls real food. For its part, Fox News discovered what the legendary script doctor Robert McKee proclaims in his book on screenwriting principles. People love stories, he says, and the heart of a story is conflict. Without conflict, you have no story. For Fox, the primary goal isn't to ferret out the truth. Rather, it's to find or create the conflict between Republicans and Democrats, the president and Congress, Tea Partiers and the liberal elite, religion and secularism, Juan Williams and NPR, Glenn Beck and Jon Stewart. In this sense, Fox News is to politics as soap operas are to families, a never-ending chronicle of what's broken and who's angry about it. Fox News also has a not-so-secret agenda. With the exception of Mitt Romney, all the major prospective Republican candidates for president in 2012 are on the Fox News payroll. But if you step back from the tales Fox tells about America and ask about the meta-narrative in which Fox itself appears as a character, it's hard not to conclude that we're viewing the triumph of capitalism over democracy. With the recent Supreme Court decision to remove limits on corporate and union financing of political advertising, the triumph seems complete. To be sure, the court left in place a disclosure requirement, though the requirement can easily be subverted. In his opinion on the matter, Judge Clarence Thomas argued that there should be no regulations, no limits, and no disclosure requirements of any kind on campaign contributions. This is capitalism unleashed as a weapon of mass destruction. In 1776, as the American colonies declared their independence from Britain, Adam Smith published his groundbreaking treatise titled An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nations. Smith coined the phrase, the invisible hand, to describe how self-interest guides the most efficient use of resources within a nation's economy. Public welfare, in this view, comes as a byproduct of self-interest. Smith famously writes, "It is not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from regard to their own interest. We address ourselves not to their humanity, but to their self-love, and never talk to them of our own necessities, but of their advantages. Nobody but a beggar chooses to depend chiefly upon the benevolence of his fellow citizens."